guys, I want to talk about physical modeling today, and it's just another way to build instruments than the old sample-based instruments that demand, say, a 60 gig chunk of your hard drive for any new instrument. I'm not putting physical modeling over any other kind of synthesis in this video. I use different synths for different reasons, and I'm not particularly hardcore when it comes to any specific kind of synth. I can use a FM synth from the late 80s if I find the sound interesting enough. But what I'm focusing on here is physical modeling because of its malleability, the possibility of shaping its sound to whatever you want, and hopefully in a container that allows for me to use my MIDI guitar as an MPE controller. But let's start with some physically modeled attempts at realistic instruments. Overly simplified, the physical modeled instrument is a mathematical construct. It's a model of perhaps an instrument in an acoustic environment, but it can be sort of anything. If we want to make this really easy for ourselves, we can split it up into two parts. One is an exciter part and one is a resonant part of these mathematical models of acoustic environments or instruments in environments. So the exciter part is whatever you can think of starting a sound with. It's a mallet on a pipe or a mallet on a glass jar or whatever, or a finger plucking a string on a guitar. That's what's starting the sound. And the second part is a resonant part, and then we start work with the settings around qualities it should have. So we can actually put a string on a glass jar if you want to, and see what that comes out as. We don't really know what the sonoric qualities would be in the end, and that's part of the exploration with these modeled instruments in most cases, at least for me. But let's start off with the things we know. So audio modeling has done these real instruments with their models of the strings, for instance. So let's go to their cello. I just want to point out before anybody else does that the SWAM instruments comes in two versions, actually, or two varieties. Some of them actually contains samples in the exciter part or in the tone initiating phase of the instrument build. That would be in the woodwinds. The strings are, according to themselves, actually fully physically modeled instruments. But does it matter if a small part of the exciter part, for instance, in the instrument build has a sample in it, or if it doesn't? For me it doesn't. I don't care. I'm just interested in good sounding instrument that plays well. There are other hybrid physically modeled instruments as well. The Acousticsamples with their Vhorns is a perfect example. Another interesting attempt at a real instrument model is Modartt Organteq, a physically modeled pipe organ. And here we're not talking about a sample, but instead a full physical modeling of everything that goes into such an instrument. We're talking about all the pipes and all the stops and the sympathetic resonance. It's an immensely complex model, of course. But the instrument in itself isn't that complex for us to play. I can access 3 different layers of the piano set, and I can differentiate between those with different sustain pedals. So I'm using 1 sustain pedal per key set here. Still on the subject of Modartt, the other software they have, and that's Pianoteq, and listen to their physically modeled version of a nylon string guitar that's kind of new for them. Here in combination with the organ from Organteq. So let's stop for a second and ask ourselves why we want to use these particular kind of instruments. I've done this take. It's by no means perfect. The sounds are by no means perfect, but I'm happy with it because it allows for me to come through. And this is sort of why I'm using the modeled instruments rather than any sample libraries or perhaps any more static form of synthesis in terms of sound generation. Let's get into the fun part and let's get after those synths that really pushes the limit. And we're going to look at synths like Modus, that's a playable scrapyard of sheets of metal and steel bars and strings and rattles and stuff like that. We're going to look at Reason's new physical modeling synth, that's Objekt, and their old synth, that's one of my all-time favorite, Friktion, for stringed instruments. And let's also look at Expressive E, you know, the guys behind Osmos. They've come up with a new set of presets for Imagine, which is one of their physical modeling synths. It's a combination of 2 sounds, and each sound has an exciter part of its sound source and a resonator part. So the exciter part that they call excitators are mallets, and we have noise and we have sequence. So it's different ways to get the ball rolling, to get the sound started in some way. Like a strike, we have something like a breath or a wind or some burst of air of some sort, or we have a sequence. And then we have different categories for resonators here. We have skin and string in this case, and we have string and tube. And for these presets, these are the presets that belong to the category of a mallet for an exciter and a skin and a string combination. If we look at a mallet and a string and a bar combination, we have these instead. We have shine here. We have mute. And you get this banjo effect right away, so the mute effect is obvious enough. Impact, though, should make a difference. In this case, the hit is with some sort of felt mallet going into metal brushes at the other end. And anything in between, of course. So you have these two instruments side by side to make one preset, and then you also have stuff like LFOs and curves and stuff that you can tie to these macros. Say I want a subtle movement here. Now that's the shape of that envelope that sort of decides how this macro is moving and the sound of that evolution is decided by that. But you could of course connect your foot pedal to that macro and make your own sort of swells as you go along. Let's just go over some presets here. Plucks are obvious. They have pads, of course. In the next clip, I'll have a sort of bellish sound at one of the layers. I'm using Modus on one layer, I'm using Imagine on another, and I'm using the cello from the guys at Expressive E on the third level. We hear three kind of distinct sounds here. We have this metal sound that's from Modus. It sounds like a sheet of metal that you would shake and get this thunderstorm sound, perhaps from on the theater, old school special effect. And we have this bell-like kind of sounds, and that's from Imagine. We also have the shallow sound, obviously. So let's go on to Reason Studio's physical modeling string instrument, Friktion. Listen to this performance because it's a long performance in one take, but listen to all the differences, all the nuances that's coming through and all the sort of smaller variations. I'll play this Friktion synth as a plugin inside of MIDI Guitar, so I have the MIDI Guitar set up around this. Let me just show you how it works to begin with. This is what it sounds when I'm not using the breath controller at all. But if you look at the articulation box here in the middle, here's where you would connect your foot controller. I have my breath controller for this. Now you could hear that it's a vibrato on this. I'm not interested in that because I have vibrato on my guitar, so I'm not using that. Let's listen. Instead, I will see to that I match the pitch bend range here on my MIDI guitar setup as well as in this software. And then I can use my vibrato, which is infinitely better, of course, for my expression to come through. This being a physical modeling synth, we have a exciter part and a resonator part. Let's look at the resonator part first. You have here a resonator body that says cello 3, and we have a list of different options to choose from. So I can actually use this exciter part the way they've modeled this cello to be attacked, but I can use another resonator part. So I can use a little violin instead for resonator body. It will not be as full, I guess. Let's hear. Okay, so if I choose something else, I can choose a banjo. It's still going to sound as a cello. It's just going to be with a smaller body to have the sound propagating. So we have stuff like taiko drums and darbuka as well. So here's a completely different setup. You have still the same exciter part, but now we're into a drum instead. And we can do this only because they have these mathematical models of what it would be like for a sound to be reverberating inside a darbuka, say. So let's go back to the cello 3. Obviously the resonating part is a big part of the reason for why the cello sounds like it does. This particular instrument has also focused on stuff like precise articulation from bow pressure, and we have bow variation that is coming from the bow position. It's related to the bow position, so there will be different kinds of variations depending on what kind of bow position you use. So if I want to use a flautando sound, a really flute-like sound for the cello, I would go for no pressure and a bow position like this. You almost get a metallic sound here, but you have to dial in exactly what you're looking for. But there are a lot of possibilities here. You also have bow noise, for instance. And that's kind of common in these emulations of real instruments. We can also go into pluck instead, and that's another kind of exciter. And then we have controls like finger. Collisions are usually in these circumstances stuff like when a string starts vibrating and perhaps vibrates against the fret or the fretboard or stuff like this. Then collisions are those noises that appear. So I would guess that. Yeah, you hear some sort of collision noise. That was pizzicato, and then you have collegno, so that would be equivalent to striking the bow against the string instead. And collision in that case is probably something else, I would guess. This is what this kind of software is all about. It's emulating in the finest detail what a string instrument could be, but also lets you sort of assemble your own string instrument with those possibilities and put one together that perhaps hasn't ever been, but that's up to you. Let's use that idea and segue into the next clip here. You're gonna hear Friktion on one layer. You're also gonna hear Objekt, which is Reason's new physical modeling synth, on another layer, and I'm using it quite similarly to how I used Imagine in the earlier clip, like a percussive effect. I'm drawing from Swedish folk music here, so this is going to be pitchy perhaps, kind of wild. It doesn't have to necessarily do with any sheet music or anything like this. This is more of a musical, joyous expression. So let's dive right into Objekt, which is Reason's new physical modeling synth. It's rich in these kinds of flavors. You have metal tongues, this is a plastic tube slap, of course, and I love these. The effect of you striking harder and the timpani sounding as it would with a crescendo sound. It's really precise modeling here. If we go into the exciter impact part here, and we have sort of the resonator parts with the objects here, and we have collision and we have pitch mods, we have some dispersion and stuff. These are all settings that you have to explore for yourself, but I want to give you a little tip that is only for us MIDI guitarists. If I turn this rack around, we have this in-out device, and I have the main in-out. This is the pure audio coming in. Since I'm coming directly from my audio interface, this is my direct guitar audio coming in. So I don't have anything else between the guitar and Objekt. And flip back. Here you have something called external in. And when we use this, we use our incoming audio as part of the exciters. Actually impacts how our sounds are created. It sounds different. So if I raise the external in here, you're gonna hear that it's if I take it away all the way, this would be only my MIDI, the translated MIDI going to the Objekt synth and having the part of the exciter that's already in use working. But raising this, I get some sort of direct access to Objekt with my incoming tone. And other than that, of course, we have Objekt working like any other physical modeling synth. You have an exciter part, you have the resonating part. This is a bit more complex in terms of how it's set up, and you have to go over the manual to know what everything is. and I'm not going into that. I just wanted to show you this little nifty trick of flip the rack and connecting these external in cables, so you have the possibility of using your own guitar as a trigger for the exciter part. Before I go on and talk about Modus, a new physical modeling synth with MPE capabilities, I want to talk shortly about another aspect of this malleability that I was talking about with regards to these physically modeled instruments. It's not only the sound character that is possible to mold and shape easily with these kind of instruments. We have stuff like tunings. I can nowadays send out some overarching protocol to retune every synth that I'm working with. I can retune my fretboard setup to whatever kind of temperament I want to use. The problem lies within us as of yet to sort of approach microtonal harmonies aesthetically. I think we're probably not there yet, but we will be. With the advent of stuff like Osmos and Rolly Seaboard, the next version of MIDI Guitar, I think that these organic movements, these imperfections and these movements are going to find their way into the music and into production, and perhaps rid us of these stale, sterile, boring productions that sound like a polished diamond, but there's no life at all in them. So this is one of the hopes that I have for MIDI Guitar, together with some tuning abilities, especially for stuff like physically modeled instruments, since they react so well to these tuning protocols. So you obviously hear how clear these bends are that are also sent by this protocol, of course. That's part of the tuning information. If you send by MPE or by MIDI with polyphonic bends, that information is also conveyed. I have a piano here. That's only retuned, obviously. And I turned off the possibility of bending those notes because the piano don't have that particular quality. It sounds weird if you do that. So we take instruments that are modeled after our real world and we can take them as far as we like. It becomes even more apparent with instruments like Modus that I'm going to show you right now, because it's built from real world stuff like metal plates, steel bars, strings and springs and stuff. Let's go into that software as the last stop in this very long video on physical modeling and instruments that work really well for MIDI guitar. Last thing here, Modus by Physical Audio. It really seems like the perfect synth for this MIDI guitar project. It's a physical modeling synth and it has MPE capabilities. If we listen to the sounds, concepts like strings and plates. These are put together in whatever way you see fit, and you can use something like a multi-strike and you get these. For these metal plates I can use sine wave or saw as drivers or exciters for the sounds. I also have strikes, but then I lose out on any sort of pitches. It doesn't matter where I choose to pick the notes, it doesn't affect the pitches. So for the strings it looks a bit different. I can strike one string and the other string is co-resonating or sympathetically resonating with that. For the strings and the plates we have like a metal frame here and something called connections, 2 different kinds of connections, 3 different maps for these connections. You see that there will be some openings here. That's so we can have some rattle effects. We have something called strength with regard to these connections. You can control the force with rate, of course. This is a wonderful world of scrapyard composition if you'd like to, but the problem I have with this synth, as I've noticed some others have too, is the actual MPE implementation, and I guess the guys are working on it and they are probably going to do something about it. I just hope they will, because I love the sound of this and I would love to have it more playable in terms of MPE as from this MIDI guitarist perspective. So here are the MIDI CC and MPE controls. The CCs, that's not that much to talk about. You have the channel after touch and that's vibrato and stuff, and you can connect to all of these CCs if you like to, and if you want to have external control over these parameters. When it comes to MPE, they've chose to implement it as the x-axis is pitch, the y-axis is pluck force. It seems kind of strange to have that as pluck force. You would want to have pluck force as a pressure, for instance, but there they have connection strength. So it's a lot of things that are new to their particular way of setting up, and it might be that I have to get acquainted with how they have set up and make my own adjustments. It's not up to them to sort of mold themselves to my liking. This is more a question of, will I be able to get over myself and get with the program in terms of this, or won't I take the leap, so to speak? It's easier for me if we have a common ground to stand on when we're walking into these new territories, and MPE instruments are certainly new territories for MIDI guitar, because we're used to the oldest archaic MIDI standards that you can think of, and now all of a sudden we're standing with the possibility of using the most advanced synth and microtonalities and all these kinds of goodies, and then somebody else comes telling me, okay, you're not going to use the x-axis for this implementation in this particular synth. It becomes an issue. Perhaps it's going to be a hindrance in terms of people accepting it. I don't know. I love the sound of Modus, I must say that, and I love the idea of being able to create my own playable scrapyard like this. So I'll leave you with this. I hope you had some use for this video in terms of getting your head around what physical modeling is and if it is for MIDI guitar or not. I will be coming back, but probably more with MIDI Guitar 3 then, I guess. I hope so, really, because I have so much stuff I'm dying to be able to show you. But until then, bye.